Have you ever walked into a room and thought, any minute now they're going to realise I have no idea what I'm doing? Or feel that you have to work harder than everyone else to avoid being found out? Or maybe you fob off praise or compliments with comments like, I was just lucky, or it's really not that big a deal. It was kind of easy. Maybe you've just got a promotion, passed your exams, published the paper, landed the client, and instead of feeling proud, you feel queasy. You're already bracing for the moment someone taps you on the shoulder and says, sorry, mistake. This wasn't meant for you. If that sounds uncomfortably familiar, you are in very good company. Einstein, Maya Angelou, and Michelle Obama have all described feeling like intellectual frauds despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Hello, my name is Sabina Brennan and you are listening to Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain. Today I'm unmasking what is often called imposter syndrome, though technically it isn't a syndrome at all. And I'm going to explore what's really going on in your brain when you're constantly waiting for the fraud police to knock on the door. Clinically speaking, there is no official diagnosis of imposter syndrome. You won't find it in the DSM or the APA dictionary. Back in 1978, two psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, were working with wonderfully capable women, academics, lawyers, doctors, high-achieving students, who all described the same secret fear. I've fooled everyone. I'm actually not really that smart. One day they'll find out. Clance and Imes called this the imposter phenomenon. Deliberately not a syndrome, not a pathology, but an internal experience of intellectual phoniness that persists despite objective success. So for this episode, I'm going to use the term imposter phenomenon. At its heart, it's a pattern where you dismiss your achievements, fear being exposed as a fraud, attribute success to luck, timing, or other people, and set the bar so high that nothing ever feels enough. It's uncomfortable, but it's also very human and very understandable once you look under the hood of the brain. So let's get a little bit of context about imposter phenomenon. Clance and Imes originally studied about 150 high-achieving women and noticed two common early familiar patterns. Either one, you had a sibling labelled the smart one and you grew up chasing validation you never quite received. Or two, you were the golden child, brilliant in every way, and real-world setbacks later on felt catastrophic as though you'd been exposed. In both cases, there's a painful gap between the messages you got at home and the messages you get from the world. And you conclude that one of them must be wrong. The imposter phenomenon is essentially living in that gap. Fast forward 40 plus years, and research suggests that imposter feelings can show up in anyone across professions, ages, and genders, and are especially common in high pressure, high stakes environments. So we see higher rates in students and academics in elite settings, in people starting something new, like, a promotion, a degree, a leadership role. It's also seen in those in competitive fields like medicine, law, and technology. Also, people from underrepresented groups, women in male-dominated spaces, people of colour in largely white institutions, first-generation students, and also neurodivergent people navigating normative cultures. And this is where language becomes really important. Writers Ruchika Tulshun and Jodi Ann Buri have argued that constantly telling women they have imposter syndrome can inadvertently medicalize a reasonable reaction to bias and exclusion. Look, if you're underpaid, overlooked, or repeatedly mistaken for the assistant, feeling like you don't belong is not delusional, that's data. So when we talk about imposter phenomenon, we're talking about two layers. One, the internal story your brain tells about you, and the external reality of the systems that you're operating in, and both matter. What about the science then? Well, let's peek inside the skull for a moment. What's happening in the brain when you're convinced you're a fraud? So, first of all, threat detection goes on overdrive. So, imposter feelings often show up in situations of social evaluation. Presenting at a meeting, submitting an assignment, speaking up in class. The brain treats social threat, rejection, humiliation, exclusion, almost like it treats a physical danger. The amygdala, your inner alarm system, lights up and flags, danger, you might be judged here. That then activates the stress response, releasing cortisol and adrenaline, sharpening your focus on threat cues. The frown, the unread email, the silence after your comment. Over time, if self-doubt is chronic, these circuits get well worn. The more often you think, I'm not good enough, the more easily that thought fires. That's neuroplasticity. The brain gets better at whatever it practices, including beating yourself up. Secondly, then, the prefrontal cortex is under pressure. So the prefrontal cortex, the rational planning, perspective taking part of your brain, is like the wise adult in the room. Under chronic stress or when the amygdala is screaming, the prefrontal cortex, it doesn't quit, but it becomes and can become less efficient over time. That's when you notice some of these creeping in. Black and white thinking. If I don't nail this, I'm a failure. Catastrophizing. One mistake and my career is over. Mind reading. They're quiet, so they must think I'm incompetent. You get the picture. You're not seeing reality clearly. You're seeing it through an anxious filter. Then thirdly, there's perfectionism and the reward system. A recent meta-analysis found a strong relationship between perfectionism and imposter phenomenon. Perfectionism plugs straight into the brain's reward circuitry. You set impossibly high standards, then your dopamine system only gives you a proper reward when you hit the exact bullseye, 100% or A+, glowing feedback. Anything else feels like a failure. As a result, you either overwork frantically to try to guarantee perfectionism, or you procrastinate to avoid the risk of not reaching it. Either way, your nervous system never really gets to stand down. Clance described a very familiar loop, the imposter cycle. First of all, you face a task, exam, a talk, a project, and feel intense anxiety and self-doubt. Next, you respond either by over-preparing or by avoiding and then cramming. You succeed. Of course you do. You're capable and you worked hard. Instead of feeling competent, you explain the success away. Well, I was lucky. They were being nice. They overestimated me. You get temporary relief. Then the next challenge appears and the whole cycle starts again. Neuroscientifically, each turn of that cycle reinforces two networks. The threat network, I'm in danger of being exposed, and the story network, I only succeed by accident or by fooling people. If left unchecked, imposter phenomenon is associated with higher levels of anxiety, depression, burnout, and lower job satisfaction. The good news? The same neuroplastic brain that learned to doubt you can learn a different way of relating to your achievements. So let's talk about 3 tools for your super brain kit. What actually helps? As always, these tools are invitations. They're not instructions. Try what fits, leave what doesn't. So tool 1, name it, don't shame it. So the first step is to shift from I'm a fraud to I'm having an imposter moment. When you name the experience, oh, this is the imposter phenomenon Sabina talked about on Superbrain, not the truth about me. You create just enough distance for the prefrontal cortex to come back online. So practical ways to do this: normalize it out loud with trusted people, friends, colleagues, mentors. Group work and peer support were central to Clancy's original therapeutic approach because it's much easier to see that other brilliant people aren't frauds than it is to see yourself not as a fraud. Start a small file or a notebook called Evidence I'm Not an Imposter, or whatever you want to call it. Jot down achievements, kind emails you've received, praise, moments you handled yourself really well. Your brain is already keeping a detailed file of your perceived failures, so you keeping a note in a journal is simply balancing the archive. The goal is not to banish self-doubt forever, but to recognize it as a story, not a verdict. Tool 2, rewire the self-doubt circuits. Because the brain is plastic, how you respond to imposter thoughts can either deepen the groove or start to change it. Here's a few tweaks you can make. Catch the thought, tweak the wording. Instead of, I have no idea what I'm doing, try, I'm learning as I go, like everyone else at this stage. Or, this is new, so it makes sense that I feel stretched. It's honest, but it's not harsh. Experiment with good enough. If you're someone who normally does 12 hours of preparation, deliberately try doing 6, as Clance sometimes asked her clients to do, and notice that the world does not end and people still value your work and your work is actually still good enough. Practice self-compassion. Treat yourself the way you would treat a friend who had just stepped into a new role. We know from brain imaging studies that self-compassion can quieten threat circuits and engage networks involved in safety and affiliation. Essentially, telling your nervous system, you belong here, even if this is hard. If you haven't already done so, you can check out my episode of Superbrain on self-compassion earlier this season. These small repetitions teach your brain that challenge is not automatically danger. It can also be growth. And to be perfectly honest, you can't have growth without surmounting challenge. Tool 3, change the context, not just yourself. Finally, remember that it isn't only an inside job. Sometimes your brain is sounding the alarm because the environment is unsafe or inequitable. So alongside inner work, ask, is this a me problem or a context problem, or both? Do I have the psychological safety here to admit I don't know yet, or to ask for help? Whose voices are missing from the room? And then if you're in a position of power, a manager, supervisor, educator, you can share your own imposter moments to normalize the experience, and it is a normal experience. You can celebrate process and learning, not just flawless outcomes. I think that's really, really important. Interrogate biased feedback and systemic barriers, particularly for women and people of colour and people, neurodiverse, divergent people, rather than quietly accepting, oh, they just lack self-confidence. Sometimes the most powerful way to loosen the imposter grip is not to tell individuals to fix their mindset, but to build cultures where more people genuinely belong. The imposter phenomenon is not a mental illness, it isn't a permanent label, and it certainly isn't proof that you're a con artist. It's a story your brain tells when early experiences, perfectionism, social threat, and systemic barriers collide. It's your nervous system trying, albeit a little clumsily, to keep you safe from shame and rejection. So next time you find yourself thinking, I shouldn't be here, or they made a mistake choosing me, try this. Pause, name it. There's that imposter story again. Look for the evidence, the hard work, the skills, the perspective you bring that no one else in the room has in quite the same way. And if the environment really is making it harder for you to show up as yourself, know that your discomfort is not a defect. It may be a signal that something in the system needs to change. Your brain's not the enemy here. It's simply doing what brains do, predicting, protecting, learning. With awareness, curiosity, and support, you can teach it a new pattern. Not I am a fraud, but I am a work in progress, and I am allowed to be here while I'm learning. If this episode sparked something for you, you might like to share it with a friend or colleague who feels the same way. Until next time, be kind to your super brain. It's working very hard on your behalf. Thank you for listening.